Hello to all participants of this webinar and welcome in today's session. I hope you're all having a good day. I am Alba Kecha, the organizer of this PECB webinar. Before we start, I would like to inform you that PECB is organizing PECB Certified Advanced Audit Techniques event, which will take place in Stockholm, Sweden from June 27th to July 1st. For more information, visit our website. Today's webinar will discuss the topic of implementing asset management systems with ISO 55001. The presenter of this topic is Mr. Olumide, the PECB Certified Trainer. He is an experienced enterprise architect and program director working on various technology solutions for clients in the financial services, manufacturing, and public sectors. At the end of the webinar, we have the question and answer session in where all your questions will be answered by the presenter. Accordingly, I would kindly ask you to write down any questions you may have during the webinar in the chat box of your control panel. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy this webinar. Orlando, please continue with the presentation.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Alva. My name is Orlando once again, and I will be taking you through the session on implementing asset management with ISO 55001. Okay? I'll just go ahead. For this webinar, I will focus on a couple of things, just about 5 key things. One of them will be, we will look at at a high level, we will look at the standard ISO 55001. We will also explore what we call asset lifecycle management, and I have a long list of the things that I think are included in the asset lifecycle, right? And also we'll look at the concept behind information asset. We'll look at who is an asset manager and what the responsibilities of an asset manager are. And finally, we will explore an ERP system called Odoo ERP, which we can use to carry out asset management at a high level. This will be a quick webinar. I will not spend too much time on it, and I'll just quickly go through this. Okay? I hope you can all hear me clearly. All right. So introducing ISO 55001. It's a new, not exactly new. I mean, we can't really call it new, but it's not a very old standard that has come out of ISO. It's what I will call the upgrade of the other one, which is the PASS document that a lot of organizations use when it comes to asset management. The better way of doing it is 55001. And I think it's a great document. I think it's a great standard. It describes what exactly should be adequate expectations from an organization that is implementing the asset management. And so we'll look at it quickly in a couple of minutes. All right. First and foremost, it talks about 4 key fundamentals of asset management. So these 4 key fundamentals are: 1, bringing value to the organization and the stakeholders in terms of the use of its assets. And assets are big to every organization. In fact, for most organizations, their assets is literally all that they've got, and that's all that they live with. So having an ISO standard that allows you to be able to adequately do asset management is really great. Number 2 is that it promotes alignment across the organization to achieve organizational goals. And that's also very important because different units and different departments in the organization look at assets differently. They look at it from different perspectives and they handle assets differently. ISO 55001 allows an organization to be able to basically look in the same place and drive asset management from the same perspective, using the same language, using the same terminologies across the organization. The third part is it looks at managerial leadership and their commitment towards asset management and the kind of culture that should subsist in an organization that really wants to do asset management properly. So if an organization is looking to do asset management properly, there's a kind of a culture that should exist in that kind of organization, and then the leaders in the organization should treat it in a certain way. Finally, it then looks at things like how do you achieve assurance with regards to the performance of your assets. So these are 4 fundamentals with regards to asset management that every organization should take into consideration. Once again, the value of asset management to the organization. How do you promote the alignment of asset management to the organizational goals? what you expect from the leaders of the organization, also in terms of their commitment and the culture within the business, and finally, how do you achieve assurance for producing required performance with regards to assets. I'll move on quickly. All right, so once again, let us look at some concepts that underpin asset management. And one of the great things that everybody is always asking, ISO 55001, does it deal with physical assets, or does it deal with all classes of assets? Does it deal with financial assets? Does it deal with information assets? And our answer to them all the time is always yes. It is a generic asset management approach, and it deals with all sorts of assets, any kind of asset, literally. And because usually, so far you call it an asset, that means usually it's got a value and it's important to the business, then we can deal with it using ISO 55001. So we've got to think about physical assets, an organization, the organization in which the asset does exist, the organizational processes and activities, mistakes and errors in the process of keeping the assets, and of course the risks that is attached to these assets, and finally, what are you hoping to get as a business? Are you looking to get a huge return on investment from the assets, either in the short term or in the long term? Okay. So if you look at this slide talks about the normal structure of most ISO documents. Scope, normative reference, terms and definitions. Then of course the top 7 key parts that are very important. Understanding the context of the organization, knowing who the leader is, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. So those are 7 key areas that anybody who's going to be doing asset management is going to write about, is going to really know and understand how these parts work. Okay. So you've got to be great at trying to understand the context of the organization. You've got to be great at being able to decipher the kind of leadership that does exist in that organization and whether they're committed to the asset management initiative. You've got to do a lot of planning, and you've got to put things in place to be able to support asset management. And then how will asset management operate? How can we evaluate whether we're doing well from an asset management perspective? And how can we ensure consistent growth and improvement? All right. So this is one of my favorite slides that I put together. I should patent this because I had to come up with this myself. And I was just thinking about all the engagements that I've done with regards to asset management and what exactly are the things that are involved. So this might not be an exhaustive list, but I believe it's a decent list. It's a decent list in terms of thinking about the asset management activities or processes, depending on how you look at it, and the things that make up the life cycle. So you've got to identify the asset, you've got to have some kind of registration for the asset, you've got to be able to determine the ownership and the custody of the asset, and that might be different. The custodian and the owner of the asset might be different. Then of course you've got to be able to tag and label the asset. You've got to be able to do what we call the classification or categorization, or the inclusion of both with regards to asset. We've got to be able to look at how we look at the components of the asset, the configuration and updates with regards to the asset, and how do we value the assets. We've got to be able to value the asset, and we've got to be able to manage risks with regards to the asset. Then we've got to be able to look at what is called asset depreciation, fault and maintenance management, asset history, part replacement, reporting, documentation, disposal of assets, and the entire full asset management life cycle, which is what I'm trying to achieve with this long list that I've been able to put together. So if you've got ideas around things that you think I might have missed in terms of the full cycle that assets go through, I would like to hear that. So you go. Okay? So let's put a bit of focus on information assets, because I mean, one of the great areas that I work in, that I've been privileged working, is around information assets. And information assets is a big concern in a lot of organizations as of today. So let's look at information asset as a certain kind of asset under the big category of what we call asset management. Remember that I said we can have physical assets and we can have non-physical assets. So one of the non-physical assets that an organization, that in fact every organization has got, are information assets. So we've got to be able to look at it and say, what exactly are information assets? What do we use them for? What benefit do we get from information assets as a business? And why should we be worried about putting together an asset management process for our information elements as it is? So if you once again remember the long list that we already looked at, right? You've got to be able to inventory all your assets. A lot of organizations, and if you look at what ISO 20000 looks at and ISO 27000, a lot of it is referring to assets and inventory of assets that you keep, especially with regards to information systems. Okay, so you've got to think about your servers, you've got to think about your databases, you've got to think about your storage devices, you've got to think about your applications. All these are various elements within the information asset ecosystem. Okay, and then we already also mentioned that every asset must have an owner, and the owner can be different from the custodian of the asset. That is a challenge that a lot of organizations usually have, being able to differentiate between who is the owner of an asset and who has custody of that asset. So inventory is extremely critical. We cannot do without this. Inventory is what it is that we look at now. We start to talk about the service catalog, and deciding on the ownership and being able to capture that within the catalog itself is extremely important. All right. So these are some classes of information assets: authorized assets, unauthorized assets, software databases, services, people, tangibles. All these fall within the class of what we call information assets, right? And once again, if you remember the list that we're looking at when we're looking at the asset lifecycle management, one of the things on that list was around configuration, the configuration of certain assets, which is basically talking about detailed technical descriptions of some of these assets, okay? Then, of course, with regards to information assets, we've got to be able to classify these. And we always talk about classification, right? Top secret, sensitive, confidential, the various ways by which an organization needs to classify its assets. Now, what is determining why you're classifying them as this? It's basic principles of confidentiality, of integrity, of availability. So from an information system perspective, it is really important that you classify right, okay? All right. Then, of course, some of them are classified as internal use. Everything that every organization has got on their public-facing website is classified as public. That means it's information that can be available to the public, right? Once again, remember our entire list that we had here on this page that talks about asset management lifecycle, beginning all the way to number 15 that we captured. So let's move on. So there's some good practices with regards to information assets. One of them is definitely around media handling. So removable media, encryption, ensuring that you limit and control the usage of certain removable media within the organization. So you see that some organizations have a lockdown policy on their laptops. You cannot bring in external hard drives or external flash drives onto the network. It's completely unlocked now. So that's a good practice with regards to media handling. Acceptable use of information. That's an extremely important part. Also very important to the people who are in information risk or IT risk, as it says. IT risk people and people in information security are always worried about acceptable use of information. So once again, this deals with classification. It also deals with security and with access control. The idea is that you should be able to control who's got access to what information based on a need-to-know basis, as it is. So acceptable use, you need to be able to come up with these within the policy, the IT policy in an organization, and it's shared with HR. So you talk about how people can use internet, email, telephone, office equipment, and everything that is information systems processing related. Non-compliance is key. You've got to be able to talk about non-compliance, violations, and what exactly the recompense is if you violate laid down policies and procedures. So anybody who is doing asset management, whatever kind of asset management, needs to be able to write about clearly in their policies what the result of non-compliance is. So in looking at the policy, I mean, recently, I think it was today or yesterday, I was reviewing the policy for a client, and one of the things I could not find in there were clear places where they've indicated non-compliance, and what exactly is, should I say, the penalties for the non-compliance. So an asset management policy is not complete without this, right? So quickly I'll go into what's the description of an asset manager. If you have an asset manager in an organization, and with regards to information systems, it's called an IT asset manager. And some organizations have this as a defined role in their own organization, where they say, we have somebody who is the IT asset manager. So what exactly will the person do? Right? It's to oversee daily and long-term strategic management of software and anything that is technology related. So of course this includes planning, monitoring, recording, software licenses, hardware assets. This individual will assist with everything with procurement strategy. So sometimes the people who deal with IT procurement within some IT departments in reality just end up taking that extra responsibility as being the IT asset managers for the organization. Right? The IT asset manager in this instance will also develop and implement procedures for tracking company assets and to oversee quality control throughout their life cycle. Now you will see that this applies to any kind of asset. It doesn't really matter whether it's a physical asset or it's a information asset. These same descriptions of the responsibility of an asset manager are valid and will hold even for non-IT things. So once again, we'll continue saying establishment of policies and procedures for asset management, identification of opportunities for maximizing assets, strategies of building relationships for auctioning, recycling, and the evaluation of asset management. Okay, the IT asset manager or any other kind of asset manager will also be involved with acquisition and deployment, right? And they would do it primarily from a supplier perspective, from a reconciliation, from an audit perspective, from a warranty and maintenance perspective. And yeah, they work very much hand in hand with the people in procurement to be able to effectively get this done. Okay. We also identify opportunities for purchasing at excellent prices. All right. Once again, pricing terms and conditions and recommendations are all parts of the responsibility of an IT asset manager. And finally is the operational part, which talks about processes and procedures for tracking assets. How do you maintain copies of software and contracts? How do you maintain what we refer to as the configuration management system? And how do you build a view on the configuration management system in such a way that the IT asset manager can effectively report from it? And how do you perform inventories, and how do you use the information that you've gathered from inventory of assets adequately within the governance and fabric of the organization in itself? Finally, IT asset manager and any other kind of asset manager is meant to be great at research, they're meant to be great at communication, they're meant to understand things like this particular standard that we're looking at, ISO 55001, and what it says with regards to asset management. And then you've got to be able to investigate exceptions and abnormalities with regards to asset management. Okay, so that ends it for the critical parts that we've done. We started with looking at ISO 55001. Then we looked at the asset lifecycle management. Then we looked at what the roles and responsibilities of an asset manager is. Finally, we just look at some simple application called Odoo. And Odoo, in this instance, we've tried to use it to customize how an organization needs to be thinking about asset management. What we found out is that when a lot of implementers who help organizations to get ready for asset management audit, when they do that, they don't think about it from a system perspective. So they might capture all the assets in Microsoft Word and in Excel documents, but sometimes the things that they need to do will go beyond the capability of what an Excel document can do or what a Microsoft Word document can do. So it would be nice to be able to have a system like Odoo to use for asset management. That you can check out Odoo online. There's a free version of it that is available. It works primarily using a Postgre SQL database, and it allows a lot of customization. People can use Python for the customization of Odoo so that it can help an organization adequately achieve asset management. So I'll just look at some few examples in here, and I think actually one critical example where we're looking at what will Odoo do for you straight out of the box with regards to depreciation, with regards to how do you compute depreciation. I was having a conversation this week with a couple of friends, and we're saying that, it's fraud if you say, oh, you bought assets 5 years ago, and you're still recording the value of the asset today, the same amount of money that you bought it 5 years ago. Because over 5 years, the assets would have been adequately depreciated. And in some instances, and with regards to some assets and with regards to some depreciation methods, if you bought an asset 5 years ago at $100,000, it might be as good as zero assets today. So it's important that anybody who is managing assets is really thinking about the depreciation of assets, okay? And that they can capture the depreciation model, the depreciation type, the depreciation approach. They can capture it adequately and subject it to, should I say, best practice. All right. So once again, depreciation is key. Since you're going to have access to this presentation, you can follow. I don't want to have to go through it, should I say, line by line or step by step as it is, but you can go through it and just look at how does a platform help you. What are the details or the kind of information that you need to be able to capture before you can even then apply depreciation to it. The two basic depreciation methods that this particular one uses, it uses linear depreciation and it uses what we call digressive depreciation. So if you look at the sample form that I've got in front of me, it talks about the asset category, a reference for the asset, if it's part of another asset, the purchase date, gross value, salvage value, residual value, computation method, and a couple of other information with regards to the asset. Now, if you can't capture all this information, then obviously we cannot apply depreciation to it. So this is very, very important and it's key. So yeah, as I said, asset name, asset category, gross value, salvage value, purchase date, and the partner or the name of the vendor or the supplier that produced it. And that's another key part. You really can't do asset management except you have adequate supplier management system. Because one of the things inside of the asset management is that it requires the information that is in the supplier database for you to be able to do it. Sometimes with regards to service level agreements and even maintenance contracts. Okay, so this is depreciation. So applied onto the asset, this is pre-coded in the system. Once you pick up the depreciation method that you decided to do, it just shows you how we depreciate. So you can look at the depreciation of an asset over a month, over a year, or over a certain period that you would like to look at it. So somebody will say, I bought an asset 2 years ago. What is the value of that asset as at today? That's key as part of every kind of audit, whether it's financial audit, whether it's ISO audit. It's extremely important that you know what is the value of the asset that you bought 5 years ago. What's that value at today? Alright, we also talked about asset categorization and classification, and this is extremely important for us to be able to classify and categorize all the assets that we brought within the organization. This is really useful, and this is also very key. That classification, whether you want to put it under IT assets, or you want to put it under physical assets, or you want to put it under all sorts of categories that you can come up with as an organization. Alright, so various parameters according to the Odoo system when you're looking at asset management. So some of this you find applicable in your own organization. Some you might not find applicable in your own organization. So it really does depend on your organization and how you decided to do this. I'm just showing to you that you cannot really do what we'll call optimal asset management if you don't have a technology platform, a software platform that allows you to be able to capture that information and manage it all time. Right? So this is an analysis sheet where we look at the gross amount, the depreciation lines, the posted amount, and everything that is financial with regards to an asset. You know, with regards to an asset, we also have what we call asset risk management, where we capture what exactly are the risks towards with regards to certain categories of assets. And you can get all sorts of reporting from assets. Reporting is extremely key. Defining the format of the report, the approach of the report, who the audience, what the report is, and the content of the report itself. So once you start to use a system for this, you can always get the reports that are customizable and that make sense to your own organization. And of course, in front of me, I've got a balance sheet, but focused primarily on the asset management portion of the balance sheet. And I've seen organizations who even represent their information assets in their balance sheet. I've seen organizations that even represent their brand even in their balance sheet, or sometimes in their POL, as the case may be. So yeah, so basically that's it. It's a quick rundown of what exactly is asset management. What is ISO 55001? What does it have to offer to people who are thinking about asset management? Then we looked at information assets as a certain category of assets. We looked at the responsibilities and of an asset manager. What should an asset manager know how to do? What should they be great at? And finally, we looked at some ERP, which is a free open ERP you can download online that allows you to be able to do asset management, information capture, and the final part of it is around depreciation, as the case may be. So thank you very much. I'll take questions now.